In other words, the left is behaving terribly badly. They've embraced a death cult. They've turned on a culture that prizes life. And in that sense, they betrayed everything that their values are about, many of which come from us, unacknowledged in most cases, but nonetheless. And it seems to me that I said earlier that Palestinian hate is not in our hands. I think to some extent it's in the hands of Western public opinion. In other words, as long as Western public opinion says to the Palestinians, "Oh, you poor dears, have the Israelis been mean to you again?" Um, they have no reason to change. But if the Western liberals were to understand that the jihadis who are killing us have them in their, and we have ample proof of this, have them in their targets as well. It would be clear to them that the best solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict is saying to the Arabs, you need to learn to live with the Jews, because to be honest, if you can't live with the Jews, I'm pretty sure you can't live with us.
This is the Common Denominator, and I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel. Welcome back to the Common Denominator. It's great to be back with you at long last. We have the distinct pleasure to sit down for our second time with Professor Richard Landis. Our first discussion was last April, and in those 5 months, we've experienced several lifetimes in the cycle of predatory news and upheaval in these now 11 months of warfare that's playing out on all fronts, not only North and South, but the fronts, of course, of both bodies and minds. In that interview, we began to dive into the phenomenon that is Pollywood, dubbed by Professor Landis, and the lethal journalism and academia that aids and abets it. I highly encourage you to listen in. If you're not already acquainted with Professor Richard Landis's work, he's a seasoned historian living in Jerusalem. His work focuses on apocalyptic and millennial beliefs at the turn of the first and second millennium, 1000 and 2000 CE. His books are on these topics include The Apocalyptic Year 1000, Heaven on Earth, The Varieties of the Millennial Experience, and his book on 2000 CE, Can the Whole World Be Wrong? Lethal Journalism, Anti-Semitism, and Global Jihad. It was described by one reviewer as the book that saw 710 coming a mile away. He coined the term Pollywood in 2003 while investigating the Mohammed al-Dura affair. Should really look into that, and maintains a blog critical of Western journalism, the Augean Stables. Professor Landis, I'm so happy to have you back here.
Thank you.
And before anything else, this is an entirely unsolicited plug for this book. Put it under your pillows. Can the Whole World Be Wrong? It's so on point. It reads more like a manual to navigate this brave new world. It's so accurate in this surreal and altogether completely unpleasant environment that we're saturated in. I really can't emphasize that enough. Professor Landis, a few questions before we get to the meat and potatoes of the discussion. Jumping right in and continuing with your work and mine, which is essentially to take back the language that's been usurped from their default vocabulary that was shaped over decades that implies Israel's inherent guilt in all things. So I want to talk about one of the main pillars of that language, and it's the creation and use of calling the population of Arabs living here in this little patch of land in the Middle East Palestinians. Because of course, once upon a time, Palestine was historically, in modern times, was referred to the Jews. I have my grandmother's Palestine passport. But others say it's a made-up people. Let's unpack that a bit.
Well, look, I mean, the term Palestine is a Western import with the British. So the identification, the use of the word Palestine, which is actually unpronounceable in Arabic, so they have an F rather than a P. That's right. The adoption is a ploy, and it was advised to them by the Soviets in the 50s and 60s to present to the West a national liberation movement rather than an Islamic imperialist movement in secular garb, which is essentially what the Palestinian identity is. It's a secular tag for what is in fact a Muslim imperialist insistence
Okay.
that there not be an autonomous infidel state in the heart of Dar al-Islam. And, there's a huge debate. Well, I think there should be a huge debate among scholars about whether this is nationalist or religious. And the overwhelming attitude of most scholars, including Israeli scholars, is that it's nationalist, it's not religious. And I understand that in the sense that if you're fighting a religion, it's a lot harder. So you'd rather imagine your enemy has nationalist aspirations, and therefore you might compromise and give them some land in exchange for peace, which was the Oslo Kunst. But the fact is that the irredentist position, which is, as Hamas puts it, not a grain of sand between the river and the sea, can go to the Jews, is essentially the same position the Palestinians have taken. And nobody really questions them on this. So you end up with a situation in which they get to say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And Western liberals hear that as, oh, finally the Palestinians will have dignity and human rights, etc., without really thinking about what that means for Jews under Palestinian control.
Well, that really taps into this other, I'm not sure if it was Dr. Einat Wilf, the religion of Palestinianism.
Right.
That really, this is what we're living in. Everyone has seemed to have been converted.
Well, not everyone, but yes. And shockingly, I say shockingly in a sense rhetorically, because if you, as my friend who did the review of my book and said I saw October 7th coming a mile away, what I didn't see was I kept thinking that Western liberals would eventually wake up, that,
Right.
at some point they would look at this incredibly predatory death cult
Yes.
and turn away. And October 7th showed them that face. And instead of turning away, they jumped on it.
But it was the having to either deny what was, of course, GoPro'd by the perpetrators. You had to swiftly skip over that to get back to the self-congratulating, I'm on the side of good.
Yeah.
So we had to, it was this entire process, which I think we're in the height of right this moment, which was the delegitimization. And now we're in the dehumanization stage. And we know what happens when that continues on.
And all of this is essentially taking on the Palestinian, quote, Palestinian narrative. In other words, for the longest time, the Arabs who call themselves Palestinian, and particularly their leadership, has been saying the most terrible things about Jews, real dehumanization, sons of pigs and monkeys, genocide, wipe them out, etc. And this is all over Palestinian media. And the West initially had taken in their quote unquote liberal national liberation narrative, so that they were willing to view the Israelis as, the responsible ones for why peace didn't happen and so on. So we even get Josh Shapiro, who called it right back in the 1990s when he said, this isn't going to work out, now apologizing for having been right. So on the one hand, you've got that sort of liberal discourse, but now they're actually importing the demonization.
That's right. It is literally a conquering of minds, which I know that we discussed it last. The thing is, I also want to say something about Palestinianism. You see in it that it's so hard to fight because, of course, facts have no relevance here whatsoever. But it's literally to each individual. It's this far off fantasy where the sun always shines and the fruits are, like you pick them off, right, in the frolicking hills. And everyone has their, and there's no injustice, and everyone's brown and, sun-kissed, and like, you know what I mean? Like nothing ever bad ever happens. And
Before the
you
West,
can't fight it.
before the West, nothing ever bad happened before the West.
Exactly. Everyone was, eating whole grains, and we were, it was fine, fit as a fiddle. And this leads me, and this is something I recognize we touched on last time, but it nags at me, because you have Qatar and Iran and Russia pouring multiple millions into this other war, which is no less, but we do nothing.
Right.
Why are you and I forced to take up the bama, to take the microphone and plead a case that is as simple as and easily repeated? This is the startup nation. We can't operate in this war in cyberspace. Where is the government?
So, I mean, there are a lot of things to be said about that. The Israeli government is in the kinetic war. As far as they're concerned, the cognitive war is a side issue. And if they win the kinetic war, that's fine. So what, they lose the cognitive war. So in the case of Mohammed Adura, whom you mentioned earlier in terms of my discovering Pallywood, the attitude of the Israeli government was, look, forget it. Don't even go there. And so, the people who fought it, like Philippe Carsanti and me, ended up being shafted, ignored, left to dangle. And the object of, the Haaretz School of Journalism, which insisted that any attempt to question this footage was some kind of conspiracy theory. So on the one hand, you have that. On the other hand, you have a problem which you can see at the end of the Amida prayer, where we ask God, to let us be silent before those who badmouth us. We're good lawyers because we can take other people's side. We're not so good at taking our own side.
I think there's something to that. It also at some point becomes so overwhelming, because again, you have to go all the way back to the letters, to the characters that we're even using. You have to go so far back to make any argument that it's overwhelming. It's easier to fight big pharma. It's just like it seems it's how, and what's incredible, and I see it in just perusing your book. And even if you go back, there was in early days, someone sending me articles of Chris Hedges and Max Blumenthal. And I was tasked with, refuting these entire, and you realize that these are the exact same arguments for 70 plus years. They haven't changed.
Well, not 70 plus years. I really think they were out there before, but they went mainstream in 2000.
Right.
And Chris Hedges is 2003, when he says, "Oh, I saw Israeli soldiers, having fun shooting Palestinian kids,"
right?
Which doesn't happen. But here's an award-winning left-wing revolutionary journalist who says this stuff, and anybody who wants to believe it will believe it.
That's right.
So what's so terrible about this is that when it first happened, like in the year 2000, I remember I was academic in the history department at Boston University, and this stuff begins to hit, and I'd say to people, look, you got to watch out. These accusations that Israel is committing genocide are terrible. And they would say, look, nobody's going to believe that.
And then a new generation, right? There's a new pharaoh in town. It's incredible. It's terrifying. It's terrifying, not because people don't like the Jews or they don't think like me. What's the most terrifying place that we are at is that if we do not have a shared reality between us, then the worst atrocities can be can be done in the name of
Right. And then either denied or whitewashed or the worst is, okay, so what? The Israelis deserved it.
Right. I mean, that's where we're at. Our very existence is
Yeah, no, and I think, already after the Adula affair made the Israelis child killers and caused the Intifada. Um, I remember talking with a journalist who was working at CNN at the time, and he said, we'd go to these scenes of the victims of these suicide terror attacks, and there was absolutely no empathy on the part of my CNN colleagues and the other journalists. And I said, well, why do you think that is? He says, I think they thought we deserved it.
Wow. That's clearly. It's very hard. It's actually been that change in my thinking, which I think maybe is a very, at least definitely American, if not Western, which is that is the individual. Open heart meets open heart. The person you're interacting with for a service or for a transaction, that you're smiling at each other, but they're imagining you to be subhuman. Is a real switch.
And the story of Oslo is goodwill met badwill.
Right.
And that's the problem for the liberal constructivist take on reality, which is, yes, you can create a different reality of positive sum relations and non-coercion, but it has to be reciprocal. If you try these techniques with people who play by zero-sum rules, they'll trash you. And we've been trashed.
Something I want to say that I heard you say recently, people comment that the ideology of Nazism, that, okay, sure, there's people who adhere to it, but it's no longer accepted, meaning we succeeded but I actually challenge that today, because and I really want you to expand on this, because it's not, of course, there is not only an open ideology within the Palestinian and Muslim world that is 100% parallel to Nazism, but more than that, the Grand Mufti Arafat is the Mufti's #1 student, and the Mufti, who is not given his due, is very potentially part of the solution being destroying us and not expelling us. He helped to write the book on Nazism,
right,
and that's fully accepted.
So, I mean, I think what happened was that Nazism was defeated as a right-wing ideology, and people are very protective of the boundary from the right and preventing that kind of anti-Semitism from entering the public sphere. But what the Palestinians were able to pull off was to bring it in from the left. I mean, they claim to be from the left. There's no more regressive right-wing ideology than Islamic imperialism, and particularly the Palestinian version of it. But what they managed to do was to articulate all this stuff slightly whitewashed. They don't openly say in Western progressive circles, we want to exterminate the Jews, but they certainly say it amongst themselves, and the lethal narratives that they tell about Jews are intended to, if you will, nurture other people's hatred of the Jews. And we've accepted that discourse. Our journalists have accepted it. Our academics have accepted it. It's become widely accepted that you can be pro-Palestinian, and if somebody says, but they have a Nazi ideology or they're direct inheritors of the Nazis, which is true in both cases, they'll say you must be some kind of racist. I'm not listening to you. So yeah, no, I mean, it's really quite fascinating the way, and this is true of millennial beliefs, particularly paranoid millennial beliefs, which is that they can they mutate to adjust to the atmosphere. And if the left wing is open to a just barely disguised Nazi exterminationist anti-Semitism, then go there. Don't beat your head against the right wing door. Go to the left wing.
Right. We'll just call it cultural. It's a cultural anomaly, and what can you do? which leads me to the one other question I had. I saw you posted as well. There was a couple examples of this, but there was one man who said, before the Jews come get us, Hamas is going to destroy us, and he was found murdered the next day.
Right, I think beat up.
What's that?
I think he was beat up. I mean, I saw a picture of one guy who was beat up.
Okay, so this one guy beat up, clearly deterred from speaking his mind. Yes. Emphatically, right? And so I want to ask you, nearly 2 billion Muslims, right. And we've got, Bodedim, a few right. Singular people speaking right. against this. There's no question that the intimidation and the fear of violence and repercussion is a real. We see it. Right. We saw it, right. But there's got to be more of an expression that there is such a ubiquitous acceptance among multiple millions, 2 billion, of this Nazi ideology.
Right. So, I mean, on one point, you can say people are intimidated, which means they won't speak out. But the enthusiasm that they show for the narrative that's being crammed down their throats, and which is greatly to their disadvantage. I mean, lethal journalism in which you tell Palestinian propaganda about Israel may be bad for Israel, but it's also own goal war propaganda in which you're literally circulating the propaganda of your enemies as news, which is what the journalists have been doing now for 25 years, since 2000, in a pack, and now even more. I mean, I follow CNN, and I'm about to do some stuff on CNN. It's staggering. It's staggering how much the time they spend communicating Palestinian suffering. I mean, Ukrainian suffering, not there.
Right.
Right. It's just, Sudan, not interested. Even Yemen, all the thing we hear about is that they're attacking Israel. You don't hear about what they're doing to their own people. So it's really quite astonishing that the media is locked into this pattern, which ultimately, I argue, sacrifices the Palestinian people, because, I mean, it's a luxury belief. The people that you say you're supporting, you're actually undermining terribly. Hamas would not carry out this elaborate and very expensive form of human sacrifice in which they attack Israel, and when Israel responds, they hide under and amongst their own civilians so that civilians get killed. This kind of strategy of maximizing your own people's suffering and your own people's death count, this strategy wouldn't work if the Western media weren't playing along and giving Hamas this huge propaganda victory by circulating these pictures and thereby feeding this discourse that Israel is committing genocide and so on.
It's a crucial point. Everyone, this is, at the heart, of course, of your work, the mistrust with the media and the extremely valid reasons for it, but that they are more than accomplice in every single death, because they actually they just are. It's such a crucial point. Yeah. It just is. It's you. What's the alternative? You've got to get your information somewhere. You've got to call the Arabs who live here something. What? How do you navigate it?
When I first started my blog, The Augean Stables, in 2005, I chose that name both because it described the media encrusted. People know what the Augean Stables are about?
I don't think so. Please describe that. Yes.
It's one of Hercules' 12 tasks, and what he has to do is in one day clean out the stables of this major cattle owner, Augeas, who never had cleaned out his stables. So they were literally encrusted with shit.
Yeah.
And Hercules manages to do it in a day by rerouting a river to flow through the stables, and he scrapes off the stuff and the river carries it away. And I thought at the time, first of all, it was a perfect description of the accumulated bad habits of the media, but also that the internet would be the river that ran through it. No, the internet has dumped far more shit than it has cleared out.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think
this new University of Austin needs a school of journalism, and they have to learn this stuff. They have to teach the kids about what happened with Abdullah, what the consequences were, how the media responded to their mistakes. Again with Janine, and right up to the present. I mean, there's a constant pattern of mistakes by modern journalistic professional standards, and from which they never learn.
But they don't want to learn because it's the short-term income, income of fame and money at the cost of you said this, was it you, or you were describing someone else's definition of anti-Semitism, which is hating the Jews even when it's
killing you. That's mine. The other one, which is finer, is and gets at Jewish self-criticism, is Walter Benjamin's comment that an anti-Semite is somebody who takes a tenth of the jokes that Jews tell about themselves seriously.
So I always say that that you're really, a lot of us, of course, moved here from different countries, and you really know you're Israeli when the jokes that come out at some point after something terrible that happened to us, and you belly laugh like no before. You okay? I'm really Israeli now. It's the black humor, and it's true. We are such a self-deprecating people. And that leads us into what I have waited 5 long months to discuss with you. And you mentioned even in the chapter in your book that this is one of the hardest subjects to squeeze into one chapter. And that is, of course, it's the self-hating Jew, but it's also the phenomenon you call the chapter, the pathologies of self-criticism. I'm first in line. So please, let's go there.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say that the two greatest secular talents of the Jews that have been there from the beginning, from the days of Abraham onwards, is self-criticism on the one hand, and a sense of humor, self-deprecating sense of humor. And I think these are two key elements in Jewish success in the world. But particularly with the self-criticism, it can go viral. I don't know what the right analogy is, but it can become pathological. And you see that particularly after 2000, there were a whole bunch of Jews who all of a sudden, had more or less been invisible Jews, very successful playwrights, famous people, who all of a sudden felt the need to come out and say, as a Jew, I denounce what Israel is doing. And so you have this sort of, look at me, I am so self-critical that I will side with the other side. They wouldn't say with my people's enemies, because they don't want to believe that they're siding with their people's enemies. So, the Palestinians are ready to make peace if only we were more forthcoming. And what you ended up with, I don't know if this is directly to what you said, but I think it's an important point to consider. When Oslo was first formed, it was the positive sum formula perfected. It was, we'll give you land, you can have your nation, you give us peace, and we can move on together into a much better future. And Arafat, and he made it clear almost immediately, saw this as land for war. Whatever land you give us, we will use to conduct the war against you. We're not, And so the irony of this is that for policymakers, as long as you cling to the positive sum formula, if only Israel would give a little more, we were so close that then we'd have peace. Whereas the zero-sum formula, which is clearly Arafat's, clearly the Palestinian leadership, there's no Palestinian leader who doesn't adopt this zero-sum formula. For them, any further concession was just an invitation to more aggression. And that's precisely what's happened. And the irony of all of this is that, rather than re-examine the mistakes they made during Oslo, the peace negotiators and the progressives and so on have in fact decided that the Palestinians were innocent and Israel was guilty. So you have that Josh Shapiro, sort of travesty,
right?
In which, oh, I'm sorry, I said that Oslo wouldn't work because the Palestinians weren't ready for a positive sum deal. Hello, you were exactly right. But in today's atmosphere, that's a killer in politics.
I want to discuss more both as a Jew, not as a Jew, but as an actual Jew, the phenomenon, how you see it as it's something that nobody teaches us. Actually, that's not true. There is certain, there are prayers where you go and you reflect, every single night, right before you go to bed, and obviously Yom Kippur, and obviously, but also there's something I grew up secular, and that was just ingrained, the self reflection, the work. Part of it's such a beautiful thing, but why do Jews take this with both hands and koala around it?
In a funny way, not so funny, but in a funny way, what they've done, the hyper self-critical Jews, as I call them, and by the way, I don't call them self-hating, I call them self-debasing. In other words, debasing themselves before Gentiles, it fulfills some kind of need on their part. We could go into what that need is or what those needs are, but the tendency to spill your people's guts is accompanied with a very powerful sense of self-importance. These people believe that they are prophets. And they say that they are the prophetic voice, so they don't hate themselves. Of course, no prophet ever went to the court in Babylon or Assyria or Egypt and denounced the Jews, and that's what they're doing. The prophets were speaking to their own people. These people are not speaking to us; they're speaking to people who hate us, and it's just staggering.
But what's is it I saw you right. I thought that was incredibly accurate. The sort of, if you all would just behave, hush. If you Jews would quit bickering and quit ABCDFG, then they wouldn't hate us so much. But I think there's also a lot of people, they perhaps some of these as a Jews need to be loved. They need to be accepted.
Oh yeah, no, there's no question that. I remember Michael Lerner complaining to me that he's all alone because of the things he said, and I said, look, you're all alone in the Jewish community, but the Gentiles love you. So yes, there's a huge need for affirmation. My guess is that somebody like Peter Beinart is a good example of that. I mean, he's a rock star because he betrays his people and tells people that Hamas is a reasonable organization with which we could deal if we only weren't so stiff-necked and so on. So there's that part of it, but I think there's another part to the self-deprecation and so on. It's what I call masochistic omnipotence syndrome. In other words, it's all our fault, and if only we were better, we could fix everything. And this has both a normal time component, which is I want to believe that I'm master of my fate, that the Zebiyadenu, it's in our hands. When it's not, Palestinian hate is not in our hands.
Right. Right.
So on the one hand, there's that, and on the other hand, there's a kind of messianic omnipotence involved, which is if it's all my fault, then I can literally bring about the messianic era by making my people perfect. And the standard to which the anti-Zionists hold Israel is just ferocious and in great contrast to what they think about the Palestinians, whom they treat with what my friend Manfred Gerstenfeld called humanitarian racism. The racism of low expectations. These people, I can't expect anything in the way of moral behavior from these people, so I will demand 100% from my own people.
It's a bit of racism on both sides, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. That's they cover all the bases, just to be okay. Interesting. And
Yes,
how do
yes,
yeah.
cocktail.
But it differs, I guess, the way it plays out if you are an Israeli Jew or if you're a diaspora Jew. That's a complete.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how you see the Israeli Jews on that scale, with the exceptions of I don't even want to mention their name, with some of the few.
Levy.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and
who's
yeah.
a star on CNN. Yeah, so I mean, I think it really helps to consider this concept that I mentioned earlier of what is it? Luxury beliefs. In other words, American Jews can afford the luxury of thinking that Hamas would be reasonable if only we didn't beat the crap out of them every 5 years, and that the PA is ready to make the compromise for peace. They can afford that belief because they don't pay the price for it. Here in Israel, it's a different story. We pay the price. We feel it up close. We go to shivas. Our friends' kids are in the army, etc. So we can afford these luxury beliefs less than the West. But what's really sad is that, in order to maintain their luxury beliefs in the face of the kind of feedback that Israeli realists are giving them, the American Jews, the liberal Jews, actually prefer to demonize Israel than to acknowledge anything wrong with the Palestinian side. And there again, you're dealing with racism.
The most accurate way I have heard so far of describing it was, again, Einat Wilf's pound of flesh. She turned that on the head, which is the pound of flesh, which is actually the Jew of whom that pound of flesh is demanded. Right. Let me give you more of my Judaism, and there is no end to it. It is until you are no longer a recognizable Jew in any way, shape, or form. Right. But you can't give enough.
Right. Yes, you can. Right. So in that sense, it's the myth of Sisyphus. It's trying to swallow the sea. It's a bottomless pit because you're not dealing with people who are willing to accept what you offer. There's no hakarat hatov. There's no acknowledgement that you have sacrificed something. It's now we want more.
Right.
And for the Palestinians, this is a great game. They enjoy it, they celebrate it. For the West, particularly for Western Jews, this is a sort of self-inflicted tragedy.
Yeah. So so we saw recently, maybe I'll insert it in here. Just yesterday it was going around the webs, the interwebs rather, the latest As a Jew, Sarah Friedland, who I have absolutely no idea who she is,
right,
accepting her award on behalf of the Palestinians. We'll put that in here.
Okay.
And then maybe you want to comment on that.
Jewish American artist working in a time-based medium. I must note, I'm accepting this award on the 336th day of Israel's genocide in Gaza and 76th year of occupation. I believe it is our responsibility as film workers to use the institutional platforms through which we work to redress Israel's impunity on the global stage. I stand in solidarity with the people of Palestine in their struggle for liberation.
Right. So, I mean, what's striking about this speech is that it's not even, there's no evidence that she's done any independent thinking whatsoever. She's just repeating slogans. And in particular, I mean, the most striking of them all, which indicates the complete lack of reflection, is her saying, I think, 337 days of Israeli genocide, which means that she's dating it from October 7th, which was the most horrific demonstration of Palestinian genocidal intentions that you could possibly ask for. And she's dating the Israeli genocide not to the answer, but to the very date itself of the Palestinian genocide. So it's just, it's staggering. And, you know, I mean, I don't want to hold Jews to a higher standard, but, you know, normally one would expect more intelligence than that.
Well, I mean, I guess we're some of the smartest and some of the most foolish because we keep making the same mistakes. But the whole world keeps making their same mistakes along with us.
We've been commanded to make that mistake. In other words, my understanding of what God's asking of Abraham and Moses is asking of the people is that we adopt a positive sum attitude of trust and reciprocity with others, despite what they do. So, you know, those who bless us are blessed because we have mutually beneficial relations, and those who curse us end up cursing themselves. They too are losers. But in the real world, the norm is, as the zero-sum proverb goes, no good turn goes unpunished. And we can't stop doing those good turns. It's in our nature. It's built into how we identify as Jews, whether we're religious or we're secular. And the religious, I find, have more of a sense of themselves and of limits to how far that kind of self-sacrifice should go. I think the liberals are caught in a trap where they've traded in a Jewish identity for a secularized Jewish identity, which is this sort of internationalism and openness and self-criticism with no bounds. There's no point at which you say this far and no further.
That's right.
We just keep seeing them go further. What's the expression? When you get to the bottom of the hole, keep digging.
Well, that's a really interesting distinction that you made, because it makes me, it's liberalism as the religion itself. So, and this is the point that's really curious, because Jews have always traditionally been, we're out there fighting for African American rights and LGBT, like that's, we're out there. And why? Because we want the widest, we want to include everyone, because we understand inherently that that's the most that's the most efficient way to have, I guess, choreograph the world. But it goes awry very quickly.
Yeah, because we're dealing with people who don't reciprocate, and that's where the catch comes. And rather than having the courage to ask for, I mean, not even demand, I would say demand, but let's just be polite and say ask for reciprocity, it just isn't there. And so, you know, rather than people who are saying, well, Israel may be committing genocide, but how about the Palestinians? How about the hadith of the rocks and trees, that before Judgment Day, the Muslims are going to slaughter every single last Jew, and the rocks and the trees are going to call out and say, hey, servant of Muhammad, come back, come, there's a Jew behind me, come kill him. which is, standard fare in Palestinian sermons. Um, but there's this self-abnegating dimension to this in which a liberal cannot bear to acknowledge that level of hatred.
It's
It's
really, it's hard. I feel like we're touching on something here, because I feel like the self-deprecating and the willingness that, to widen that umbrella to include everyone is based on an inherent belief that your humanity, our fellows humanity, Jew or Gentile, is going to kick in. The vulnerable, the elderly, the children, at some point, truth, like, we're bound in the same reality.
Right.
October 7th uprooted that for us.
Yeah. And I mean, the reason that my book saw October 7th coming is not because, I'm not like Yigal Carmon. I didn't, as a result of intelligence, say, okay, this is going to happen on October 7th. It's just that as a historian, I understand that there are forces very strong in the Middle Ages, the Crusades, the Jihads, that are driven by sentiments which liberal society has essentially banned in the name of humanity. And they're still here, and I recognize them. I understood right away, which is why I joke that I do a history of the Middle Ages in the 21st century, because in fact, surrounding Israel are cultures that are much more like medieval society, based on honor and shame, based on blood vengeance, based on scapegoating targeted minorities and stuff. Based on the notion that you can establish God's kingdom by slaughtering everybody in sight. These things are common in the period I study, and they're common amongst our neighbors. Tom Friedman wrote an essay in one of his rare moments of lucidity called the Hama Rules, and it was referring to how the Syrians in 1982, the same year as Sabra and Shatila, surrounded the city of Hama, which was a major Muslim Brotherhood center, and just bombed the inhabitants. He surrounded it with tanks, and he just bombed it for weeks and killed 10 to 20,000 people. And that's how, in the neighborhood that Israel finds itself in, that's how you settle problems.
Right. But this is the thing, is that that is such a great illustration, because they really truly are, the vast majority of our neighbors are in this dark ages, while we're talking about this refinement, this built-in self-cleaning. I keep bubbling up and clearing out all of my personal hypocrisies and as a people, and then we come together with this more refined, and here we are, the most criticizing people on the planet, versus those who will
self-abnegating.
Self-abdicating.
Abnegating.
Abnegating?
Yeah, negating yourself. Bitul. Bitul atzmi.
Okay. Versus the people who blame everyone on the planet, women, Jews, hair, anything but themselves.
Yeah.
The furthest extremes.
Yes.
It's actually something that I find genuinely pathetic, with all the chest beating that comes from the Islamists that surround us, which is that it's interesting to me, the place that I find them pathetic or disgusting, not of course above their savagery and brutality, is the inability to have any self-reflection whatsoever. It's funny, that's the part where I sort of look down and say,
So, I mean, I think one of the things to understand here is the dynamics of shame on our culture, in which the opinion of your neighbors is vastly more important than your opinion of yourself. So that if you have an independent thought, you're in trouble trying to express it. If you can't find a way of expressing it in the coin of the realm, in terms of honor and shame, or at least bypassing the concerns of honor and shame, you don't stand a chance. And if you directly challenge it, if somebody were to say, for example, an Arab like Bassem Eid, were to say, look, we're doing this to ourselves. The Jews are not our enemies. Basamid remembers that when he was 7 years old and Israel took Jerusalem, his mother sent him out to get milk and bread from the Israeli soldiers. And he said, but won't they kill me? And she said, do what I say. And he found out the Israeli soldiers were really nice. They weren't what he had been told. So, but to express that is to run into this huge blockage, which is our honor is at stake in getting rid of this autonomous Jewish state that makes us look bad. We make them look bad, and we don't even do it on purpose. And they can't believe that. It's got to be on purpose.
I think that's like, in a word, that's really the heart of it. I mean, you can call it religious. I've heard Haviv Redigur, say that it's like kind of we're pawns in their religious war.
Right.
But that's it. We are a sore on, or that they're good with God, or that we are just humiliate them. The weakest of the weak here.
Right. So in my work, I try and distinguish between two kinds of religiosity. There are obviously more, but two major forms of religiosity. One is imperial or triumphalist religiosity, which says only when my religion dominates the public sphere and I am given public honor and superiority over all other religions, do I feel confident that my religion is the true religion. It's the proof. My dominance is the proof of the truth of my religion. It's, might makes right when you get right down to it. And demotic religiosity is a much more modest affair, which believes in the dignity of manual labor, equality before the law, a whole bunch of stuff. So it's not that there aren't demotic elements in Islam, but the triumphalist has seized through Husseini, among others, has seized the leadership. And until there's a shift towards a more demotic approach in which you can have neighbors who are not Muslim, you can interact with them in equal relations rather than dominant relations, and your religion will not be sacrificed. And I think that, when the jihadis say to the Muslims that the West is trying to destroy their religion, what they really mean is the West is destroying our triumphalism. The religion is not necessarily, although historically it's been a major factor in the development of both Islam and Sharia law.
I think that's really a crucial framework shift in viewing this. And also maybe it goes back to the earlier question, which is why it's so absolutely pervasive. You don't have demonstrations anywhere.
I mean, one of the things I like to joke about is that there are more opinions, diverse opinions among 12 million Jews about the Arab-Israeli conflict than there are amongst 2 billion Muslims.
That's right. It's so true.
It's not a culture that encourages dispute. In fact, it punishes dispute.
That's right. But it completely illustrates what you've just described, which is we are fast going, how do we make this better? How do we make it better? And they're saying, well, we've only got the one option.
What can I do? What can I do? Die.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Not even just go away, because go back to where you came from. They say in Europe and here, there's no place at all for us. Well, that's the clarity of which is, again, going back to the hasbara that we do, is that the truth, all of the talk, all of the dialogue, all of the ideology comes in this country, which it can be so difficult on so many different levels and a place to live. But what is so compelling about it is the living truths. And we are the things that, and I said this to someone the other day, talking about anti-Semitism, the things that are in your movies that scare you under the covers, we have security for outside.
Right, exactly. And that monster in your closet is not a teddy bear if you squeeze it.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so, but one of the points I think it's important to make here, and I'll go back to this notion of humanitarian racism, is that we shouldn't have an attitude of humanitarian racism towards the left. In other words, the left is behaving terribly badly. They've embraced a death cult. They've turned on a culture that prizes life. And in that sense, they betrayed everything that their values are about, many of which come from us, unacknowledged in most cases, but nonetheless. And it seems to me that I said earlier that Palestinian hate is not in our hands. I think to some extent it's in the hands of Western public opinion. In other words, as long as Western public opinion says to the Palestinians, "Oh, you poor dears, have the Israelis been mean to you again?" Um, they have no reason to change. But if the Western liberals were to understand that the jihadis who are killing us have them in their, and we have ample proof of this, have them in their targets as well, it would be clear to them that the best solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict is saying to the Arabs, you need to learn to live with the Jews, because to be honest, if you can't live with the Jews, I'm pretty sure you can't live with us.
Eureka.
Light dawns over Marblehead.
Which I'll lead to the last two questions. You are a lifelong Democrat, I believe I heard you say.
Right.
And here we are. What's more happening than the upcoming election? Do you want to make any comments on that?
First of all, it's a slow motion train wreck. I personally think that, and I'm not going to say, and I don't even know if I'm going to vote. I don't know if I can vote. But basically, I think that, first of all, a Kamala Harris win would be a catastrophe, not just for Israel, but for the, not just for Israel, but for the West and the United States, because I don't think they have any sense of how to defend against the cognitive war. They're prisoners of it. So that would be a disaster. Trump, I mean, this situation calls for incredible intelligence and skill, and I don't think Trump has it. And given his sort of emotional, erratic qualities, I can see him being equally, shall we say, destructive in his behavior as the left, and particularly now that we see through Tucker Carlson, who sat next to him at the Republican National Convention, of this sort of Holocaust denying Churchill was the bad guy, Hitler was an innocent, which is what they're doing to Hamas. It's just going back and rereading World War II with the eyes that people are asking, that people are asked to read the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Right.
I hate to say it, but I'm really pessimistic. I mean, I think either choice will be a catastrophe. I would happily not vote for either of them. But the only other candidate that appeared was Robert Kennedy. I'd vote for Nikki Haley. In fact, when Biden was forced to resign and he had yet to pick his successor, I was saying, get Nikki Haley to run on the Democratic ticket.
Right. No. Right. It's and the myopic view and the tearing up, and it's a larger topic at the end, but this tearing apart each other for the choices that don't really exist. Yes. We're tearing apart, pick left, pick right, pick this ceasefire deal, pick that one, when there is no partner, and that is the point.
Right. And it's all an expression of this desire that it be in our hands. If we can get the Israelis to do this, then things will get better. And there's no criticism about the unwillingness to confront the Arabs.
On this eve of 9/11,
Yes. Oh, yeah.
do you have the eve of 9/11 and 11 months of really gutting, devastating war, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that after 9/11, Osama bin Laden bragged that they were now the strong horse. And most Westerners thought that that was a joke. You know, how can a bunch of nuts in the mountainside in Afghanistan be the strong horse? But the strong horse is not necessarily having the majority or even remotely resembling the majority. It's having the momentum. And I would say that since 9/11, uh, largely through the use of the Palestinian cause, in fact, the momentum has been with the global jihadis. And in that sense, October 7th was another episode, along with 7/7, 2005 in England and Bataclan in France and Nice and so on. These are all elements of a combination of cognitive and kinetic warfare against the West, which has been immensely successful. And one of its great successes, again, through the Palestinian narrative, is to take over vast swaths of academia, not only amongst professors, but amongst administrators and therefore of students. So I, I don't want to end on a sour note, but it looks bleak.
It does. Because here we are very exhausted, 11 months in, and it's all before us still. We're only just getting going.
Yeah.
But and not to be kitsch about it, but the truth is that we have very few tools. But I think that the cutting through the BS, the sort of clarity that we have no partner in peace, which could create, I don't know, trying to keep it. The only secret weapon the Jews have is the moments that we have unity among ourselves. Then we're powerful. But the constant tearing one another apart.
Yeah, I don't think that. I don't think that. At least my focus. First of all, yeah, no, there's no question that serious disunity, which we see now, can be lethal, and we see, that's Josephus's description of the destruction of the Second Temple. Really serious enmities amongst the people. You can't get unity from Jews. It's just not in the DNA. But you can get a sort of unity of purpose, or certainly a unity of sympathy. And one of the terrifying things about, for instance, this speech by Sarah, whatever her name is, she's basically saying, I'm on the side of a death cult, and my people are the enemies of the world. And that's a level of stupidity and self-destructive stupidity that literally leaves me breathless.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've been in a lead up where we're sort of forced to, talking for 100,000 years about shades of gray.
Right.
I think that the choices are pretty stark and clear, pretty black and white, sort of who you stand with. And I've said it, perhaps I even said it last time, I've certainly said it before, that the very thing that's terrifying is the place where I have hope, which is literally because this includes all of humanity, because we've all got a cell phone or two, right? Is the chance, like, I feel that whatever happens, perhaps, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like the difference here is whatever happens for those who are Jews and our courageous allies, we go to it eyes wide open. Like, we understand very clearly what this process, we've seen it before, every, sniff it out dog whistle that could possibly happen. So
Right.
that's something that gives me hope, because I say, well, maybe there's a wild card in there.
Right. And certainly there's a large number, I don't know how large, but a significant number of Jews who, previous to October 7th, were part of this liberal consensus. And, as I think Bret Stephens put it, they're now October 8th Jews. They wake up the next day and realize they are alone, that they had been in the progressive camp, which was sucking the life out of them, believing that agreeing to that sacrifice would bring the right kinds of responses when we were really in trouble, and they found themselves alone. And I think that I'm basically I started my life as a liberal, as a secular liberal, and I really do have a lot of faith in that liberal promise, but it's been betrayed. I mean, the left has literally betrayed the liberal promise. The term liberal in 2003, Ian Buruma wrote in the New York Times that it's a litmus test of liberal credentials to side with the Palestinians. And this is at the height of a suicide murder campaign against Israeli civilians in malls and pizza shops and restaurants and discotheques. That, under those circumstances, the liberals make it a test of belonging to of having liberal credentials to side with these people. It's insane. So liberal since 2000 has just completely, it's maybe one of the first words to be utterly corrupted, along with subsequently apartheid, racism, genocide, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I keep using the tools that we have, and
keep fighting.
Keep fighting the fight, because that is the lesson. Is the Ein li eretz acheret, I have no place to go, means I only have a choice to fight. I'm tired. I need a drink, but that's it. And thank you always for your time, your insight, and see you again here soon, God willing.
Thanks for the good question.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you.